Black CEO insulted by white power broker at state banquet minutes later. She erased $10B in deals. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. She's a disgrace. She shouldn't even be at this table. The words detonated across the state banquet hall like a crystal goblet shattering against marble. Conversations died mid-sentence. Silverware froze in midair. And the laughter of the woman in the red dress, the one pointing across the table, cut through the grandeur like a blade dipped in entitlement. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The great chandelier above the table glowed with a cold, regal brilliance, a galaxy of fractured diamonds suspended in midair. Beneath it stretched a banquet table so long it looked like a runway of white linen and gold trim, surrounded by diplomats, financiers, foreign ambassadors, and the kind of people who believed the world spun because they permitted it to. At the near end of that gleaming table sat a woman in an elegant orange-red gown, the only black guest in the entire hall. Her posture was composed, her hands resting perfectly still on her lap, every line of her silhouette radiating dignity, even as the room pressed its prejudice against her skin. Across from her, the blonde woman in red leaned back in her chair, laughter spilling from her lips, sharp enough to draw blood. She pointed again, theatrically this time, inviting the table to join her mockery. Some did, others smirked. A few exchanged glances, the kind that said, "I know this is wrong, but cowardice tastes sweeter than courage." Servants in white gloves stood behind each guest, motionless, trained to stay out of the politics woven into expensive wine and expensive egos. The man behind the black woman stiffened slightly, as if even he felt the sting of what had been said. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. The insult hung in the air like smoke that refused to dissipate. The blonde woman leaned forward, voice dripping sweetness laced with venom. "I mean, really, who invited her? This table is for people who matter." A few guests chuckled, relieved someone else had stepped into the cruelty first. Others raised their wine glasses to their lips, trying to sip their way out of accountability. Cameras from the press balcony tilted ever so slightly, catching the tension, hungry for spectacle. But the woman in the orange-red gown did not flinch. She didn't shrink. She didn't even look at the one who had insulted her. She simply breathed in slow, measured as if gathering the room into her lungs. A ripple moved through the banquet, subtle at first. The chandelier's light seemed to dim a fraction. The laughter thinned. Even the soft bowing of the string quartet at the far wall faltered, just for a beat. There was something in her eyes when she finally lifted her gaze, something that made the air shift. Not anger, not shame, not the wounded silence the room expected, but clarity, cold, absolute clarity, the kind that arrives seconds before a storm that no one believed was coming. Her fingers brushed the screen of her phone beneath the table, a small gesture hidden behind linen and crystal, a gesture no one noticed. And yet, that tiny motion would become the first domino in a collapse that would, within minutes, erase $12 billion from the world of the people laughing at her now. But for the moment, she simply looked across the table, and the room held its breath. For a moment, the banquet hall didn't sound like a room full of dignitaries and billionaires. It sounded like nothing at all, a vacuum sealed in crystal and candlelight. The woman in the red dress shifted, her smirk flickering as the silence stretched longer than she expected. She had anticipated pushback, embarrassment, rage, anything that would confirm the hierarchy she believed she sat on top of. But the black woman at the end of the table simply watched her, expression still, posture carved from quiet steel. A minister 3 seats down cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud against the hush, A diplomat's fork scraped porcelain, and the echo skittered across the room like guilt. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim ever so slightly, as if the light itself had stepped back to observe what was about to unfold. Someone muttered, "What's happening?" No one answered. The woman in the orange-red gown finally lifted her glass, letting the candlelight slide across the rim like a slow-moving comet. She didn't drink. She just held it up, a gesture too calm, too deliberate. A few guests shifted in their seats. The blonde woman scoffed, trying to reclaim her dominance. "Oh, please," she said, waving a hand. "Don't look at me like that. It's a joke. A room like this should maintain standards." A few nervous chuckles followed, thin and brittle. But the black woman didn't react. She only set her glass back down, aligning it perfectly with the edge of her plate. The precision of it unsettled the table more than any outburst could have. Down the length of the banquet, the string quartet faltered again, a violin bow slipping half a note off, the sound bending like a warning. One of the diplomats at the center table checked his phone under the linen, frowned, and checked it again. "Strange," he whispered. The minister beside him leaned in. "What is it?" "I don't know. Something about a freeze on." But before he could finish, another phone buzzed. Then another. A quiet cascade of vibrations rippled beneath the tablecloth, like a distant tremor rolling in. No one connected the sudden wave of notifications to the slight movement of the woman's hand moments earlier. Not yet. The blonde woman noticed the shift in the room and spoke louder, clinging to her authority. "Let's not get dramatic. She's lucky to be here at all. These seats aren't meant for..." But she didn't finish, because the black woman finally moved. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just a slow turn of her head, the kind that draws every eye whether it means to or not. Her gaze swept across the table, unhurried, passing over ambassadors, CEOs, cabinet officials. Each person felt as though she saw straight through their posturing, straight through the borrowed arrogance propped up by expensive wine and borrowed influence. When her eyes returned to the blonde woman, something in the air thinned, a pressure, a tightening. It wasn't anger. It was recognition, a silent confirmation that she had given her every chance to rise above cruelty, and the woman had chosen the floor. The blonde's smile faltered. "What?" she asked, suddenly defensive. But the black woman didn't respond to her. Instead, she spoke to the room. Her voice was low, steady, the kind of voice that turns banquet halls into courtrooms without raising a single decibel. "Power," she said, "isn't the loudest voice at the table. It's the one that doesn't need to shout." A ripple moved across the guests, not applause, not gasps, but something sharper: understanding. Because in the same instant her words landed, half the phones under the table lit up again, screens flashing alerts the color of crisis. Someone at the far end inhaled sharply. "Oh my God," he whispered. His colleague glanced down at his own screen, turning pale. This can't be real. They were starting to connect the dots. But the woman in the orange-red gown didn't look down, didn't check her phone, didn't acknowledge the financial storm quietly spreading from pocket to pocket. She simply folded her napkin, placed it gently beside her plate, and looked forward, calm, composed, unbothered. A woman alone in a room full of people who were just beginning to realize they had mistaken silence for weakness, and they were about to learn what silence looks like when it belongs to someone powerful enough to move nations. No one at that table knew her name. Not yet. To them, she was simply an unfamiliar face in an unfamiliar shade. A diversity gesture slipped into a state banquet where power was usually inherited, not earned. A seat filler, an anomaly, a polite inconvenience. But while the guests whispered and scrolled through alerts they didn't yet understand, the woman in the orange-red gown sat perfectly still, her presence expanding like a rising tide, quiet, inevitable, impossible to ignore. A man across the table, a senior economic advisor, studied her with a tightening brow. He had spent months in meetings discussing national investments, infrastructure reforms, foreign partnerships. Yet somehow, he couldn't place her face. That alone should have terrified him. He glanced at the escalating notifications on his phone. Funds frozen. Pending authorization revoked. Key investors withdrawing. He swallowed hard, then looked back at her. "Who exactly is she?" he whispered. No one answered, because no one knew the truth. She had spent her entire career avoiding rooms like this, rooms where approval smelled like perfume and prejudice wore tailored suits. Her rise hadn't been televised. Her victories weren't celebrated on magazine covers. Her empire existed in signatures, not spotlights. Her name Ariana Steele was almost myth in the corporate world. A whispered ghost story told behind closed doors in boardrooms and ministries. A strategist whose investments shaped half the continent's development projects. A woman whose wealth wasn't loud but levered. And yet, the people at this table, the ones who benefited most from her influence, never bothered to learn her face. Because people like them never imagined a black woman could sit higher than they did. Ariana exhaled softly, folding her hands as another wave of discreet panic moved down the table. Ministers leaned toward each other. Advisors quietly excused themselves. A high-ranking diplomat murmured, "We're losing billions in commitments. This doesn't make sense." Action. End quote. It made perfect sense. To her, across the hall, a camera flash caught Ariana's profile, the curve of her jaw, the calm precision of her posture. The image would later circulate through newsrooms worldwide as a symbol of the night the power map shifted. But in this moment, she was simply remembering. She remembered her grandmother's hands rough, calloused, steady scrubbing the floor of a home that didn't belong to them. She remembered promises made in cramped apartments with thin walls and thinner futures. She remembered being told to use the service entrance, even after becoming the youngest executive in her first firm. She remembered the sting of every door that closed, every smile that condescended, every sentence that began with "you people." She had carried all of it here tonight, not as a wound, but as armor forged over decades. The blonde woman across from her shifted uncomfortably. "You're awfully quiet," she said, trying to reclaim the room with brittle bravado. Ariana looked up, her gaze steady enough to still the air. Quiet wasn't weakness. Quiet was power choosing patience. And patience had limits. The senior advisor cleared his throat again, this time louder. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said carefully. "If we could just—" Ariana cut him off without a word, simply by lifting her chin an inch. The gesture carried weight, authority, and history all at once. Because somewhere beneath the linen-draped table, her phone buzzed softly. One message. A single confirmation from her legal division. Commitment reversal complete. Strategic withdrawal, rolling out worldwide. The advisor's own phone lit up simultaneously, his breath catching when he read the header. Project terminated. End quote. End quote. End quote. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. A woman who didn't need the room's approval because she owned the ground they stood on. Somewhere in the hall, a glass cracked under the pressure of a trembling hand. Soft gasps fluttered down the line of white tablecloth. The blonde woman's confidence flickered, recognition dawning too slowly to save her. Ariana didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply rested her fingertips on the edge of her plate. A small gesture, a quiet gesture, but enough for everyone watching to understand. They hadn't insulted a guest. They had insulted the architect of their future, and the future had just turned its back on them. The first person to understand the magnitude of what was happening wasn't a minister, or a diplomat, or even the economic advisor now sweating through his collar. It was the maitre d'. He stood near the far column, posture rigid, trained to read the emotional temperature of a room before it boiled. And in the way faces shifted from smugness to confusion to fear, he sensed it. Something far larger than embarrassment was unfolding at his banquet. He wasn't wrong. Ariana Steele lifted her phone from her lap, not hurriedly, not nervously, but with the same calm precision she had used to place her glass earlier. Her thumb slid across the screen. A single tap, a single command. Begin extraction. The message glowed for a heartbeat before disappearing into encrypted channels. At that exact moment, deep beneath the capital city, in a government data hub lined with blinking servers, a quiet alarm activated. Not the blaring kind that sets off chaos, no. This was the subtle alarm meant for a very small list of people. A warning light that indicated something even senior officials were never meant to see. Strategic partner withdrawal. Priority override. Ariana placed her phone back onto her lap, aligning it with the fold in the linen. Across from her, the blonde woman tilted her head, trying to mask a tremor beneath practiced elegance. "What is that supposed to mean?" she demanded, voice brittle enough to crack. Ariana didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because the consequences were already speaking for her. Halfway down the table, a cabinet secretary's phone erupted in vibrations, one long buzz, then three short ones. His face drained as he opened the message. Another guest gasped softly. Another cursed under his breath. A billionaire industrialist muttered, This can't be real, those funds were locked. But they weren't locked. They were hers. The blonde woman looked around, confused by the shift, clinging to obliviousness like a life raft. What is everyone whispering about? Why is everyone acting like... She stopped. Because her father, the white power broker, architect of half the deals being honored tonight, had gone silent. Completely. His jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the glowing headlines forming on his phone. He read the alerts once, twice, a third time, hoping the words would rearrange themselves. They didn't. Infrastructure initiative. Withdrawal confirmed. Foreign development contract suspended. Joint venture dissolved pending review. It was a chain reaction, every major project that bore his signature collapsing like segments of a controlled demolition. He slowly lifted his gaze to Ariana. Recognition arrived not as shock, but as horror. He knew the name attached to those alerts. He'd seen it. He just never imagined the woman wearing it would walk into his world so quietly. Ariana folded her hands again, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. The power broker finally spoke. Barely. What did you do? Ariana looked at him for the first time that night, a calm, steady gaze that stripped the room bare. I corrected my investments, she said. The minister beside him whispered, this impacts the national budget. There are foreign delegations relying on... Ariana's tone didn't change. You built policy on the assumption I wouldn't notice how your people behave when they think no one important is watching. The blonde woman tried to laugh, but it came out strained, shaking. You can't just pull out of everything. You can't just... Ariana tilted her head slightly. I already did. Phones buzzed again. A cascade. Notices, freezes, cancellations, a financial earthquake weaving its way across the banquet table, shaking the foundations of people who had never known instability a day in their lives. The power broker's daughter stared at Ariana with dawning realization. You, her voice cracked. You're the investor. Ariana didn't blink. I'm the architect. Silence collapsed over the hall, heavier than marble. Behind Ariana, the server who had witnessed everything, lowered his gaze not in fear but in respect. Because the room finally understood. The woman they mocked wasn't just powerful. She was the spine of their entire economy. And she had finally stopped holding it up. The collapse didn't begin with noise. It began with silence, a precise, calculated silence that rippled outward from Ariana Steele's phone like a fault line opening beneath polished marble. Across the banquet table, notifications continued to erupt in discrete flashes of white and red. Each banner carried a different headline, but all of them meant the same thing. Money was disappearing. Power was evaporating, and the room had lost control of both. The Secretary of Finance, a man known for his unshakable composure, pushed his chair back from the table, hand trembling as he refreshed his encrypted inbox. This can't be happening, he whispered. She's pulling from all 14 sectors: transport, energy, digital infrastructure. These are multi-year commitments. The economic advisor beside him muttered, but how? No single entity has access to controls across. He stopped. Because he finally understood, Ariana didn't need access. She owned the systems that granted it, and now she was closing them. Down the table, a foreign ambassador stood abruptly, knocking his napkin to the floor. My country's joint funding was guaranteed, he said, voice shaking with disbelief. Our projects are already underway. The power broker, his face, the color of ash, didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the spreadsheet blooming across his screen. Numbers falling, agreements flagged, signatures revoked. Every row carried the same three words: funding withdrawn, Steele directive. The room finally had a name for its disaster. The blonde daughter clutched her father's arm. Dad, do something. But the man who had bullied congressmen, browbeaten investors, and shaped national policy with a phone call simply stared at Ariana, the one person in the hall he could not intimidate. Ariana, he said carefully, these withdrawals affect global operations. If you reverse course, we can negotiate. She didn't lift her gaze from her hands. There is no negotiation. The tremor in his voice betrayed him. Do you understand the consequences? Ariana looked up then, and for the first time that night, her expression hardened. I understand them better than you ever did. The servers stood frozen against the walls, the quartet's bows hovered in midair, and the guests watched like witnesses at an execution. Because by now, the room understood. This wasn't emotional retaliation. This was structural precision, the kind of retaliation built on architecture, not anger. 2 seats down, a tech magnate whispered into his phone. Tell them to halt the bidding. Now. If she's pulling out, the valuation won't hold. Across from him, a senator muttered, "Markets will open red tomorrow." Red? Someone scoffed. "They'll open bleeding." End quote. Another wave of notifications hit the room. Global Infrastructure Consortium, collateral reviewed. International Renewable Fund, divestment triggered. Sovereign Partnership Index, Steele positions vacated. A diplomat swallowed hard. She just pulled out of $10 billion. No, the economic advisor said quietly, staring at Ariana like she was a natural disaster no model could predict. She just pulled the scaffolding out from under all of us. The power broker's voice rose, cracking under pressure. You can't destabilize entire national programs over a personal insult. Ariana's eyes locked onto his. It was never just an insult. It was a revelation. The room tightened, breath shallow. "You believed I didn't belong at your table," she continued. "But your table exists because I allowed it to. My funding built the very projects you boast about in speeches. And you treat the people you depend on as though they're disposable." The power broker opened his mouth to argue, but his phone lit again, one final blow. Primary bond agreement. Steele Holdings exited. Market impact. Immediate. His shoulders collapsed. Somewhere near the entrance, a reporter whispered to another, "This is a restructuring of global alliances done by one woman at a dinner table." But Ariana didn't seem victorious. She seemed resolved, as if she had expected this moment all along. A final vibration buzzed through her phone, the quiet confirmation from her global counsel. Full extraction complete. Ariana lifted her glass, not to drink, but to mark the exact second the old balance of power died, and a new one, hers, took its place. The first scream didn't come from fear. It came from disbelief. A woman halfway down the banquet table gasped so sharply that her diamond necklace jolted against her collarbone. She clutched her phone with both hands, scrolling through the feed, exploding across her screen. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's already hit the press." Heads snapped toward her, forks dropped. A champagne flute trembled in someone's grip, sending ripples through the golden liquid. The hall, moments ago swollen with arrogance and laughter, now twisted into something colder, a collective dread curling through velvet and silk. Ariana Steele hadn't moved, but the room had. The Minister of Trade leaned forward, breath shallow. "What do you mean it's in the press? This happened seconds ago." The woman turned her phone outward, and the nearest guests recoiled. Breaking. Major investor pulls out of national projects. Global markets brace for impact. Another alert followed, almost instantly. Steele Holdings withdraws $10.12B in state-linked ventures. Sources confirm internal breach of protocol. And then another. Economic shockwave expected by morning. Someone whispered, "That's impossible." Nothing moves that fast. But it wasn't impossible. It was intentional. Ariana had just made sure the truth reached the world faster than the people at this table could spin it. A senator at the far end of the room stood abruptly, chair screeching across marble. "We need to contain this. Shut down the press lines. Pull the feeds." A diplomat cut him off. "They're global outlets. You can't contain global." The power broker lowered his phone, his face hollow. "This can't be happening. Everything we built tonight is unraveling." It's Sidigdalages. Ariana's gaze remained steady. Across the hall, one of the servers stepped back against the wall, overcoming his training just long enough to stare at her, not as a guest, but as a force. A figure reshaping the entire evening with the quiet precision of a scalpel. Then the murmurs began. Not soft, not subtle, not the idle curiosity of a crowd gossiping. These were whispers of fear, fear of consequence, fear of exposure, fear of realizing their futures were tied to a woman they had dismissed without a second thought. Did we really? Were we filmed? She heard everything. She saw everything. Phones lit up again. Major infrastructure bonds plunge in futures trading. Foreign delegation requests emergency review. Sovereign market index down pre-opening. Someone's voice cracked. "This is a collapse." A real one. But Ariana still hadn't spoken. She didn't need to. The silence she held was louder than any warning. The blonde woman, the one who'd mocked her first, finally pushed back from the table, her earlier bravado shriveled into panic. "Dad, do something. Stop this. Fix it." Her father didn't respond. He was staring at his phone as if trying to catch the last grains of power before they slipped through his fingers. But the screen only flashed one thing. Steele review initiated. Risk flag, high exposure. Recommendation, immediate distancing. The words hit him harder than any scandal could have. Even the systems he once controlled were now advising him to sever ties with the woman he had insulted. The blonde daughter turned toward Ariana, voice trembling. You can't ruin all of us over a misunderstanding. Ariana finally lifted her eyes. There was no misunderstanding, she said softly. Just revelation. And Sax's wind about. The chandeliers flickered, catching the shimmer of shaken crystal as guests recoiled from the quiet truth in her voice. A man at the central table wiped sweat from his brow. She warned no one. She just... No, the economic advisor interrupted, voice hoarse. She gave us warning signs for years. We were too arrogant to see them. More alerts pinged. Monetary authority confirms market volatility expected. Foreign allies seek clarification from Steele Holdings. Power brokers deals under review. Guests looked around, suddenly unsure whom they were allowed to stand beside, whom they were allowed to defend, whom they could still afford to offend. High society wasn't loyal. It was strategic, and the strategy had just pivoted. Because in every whispered conversation, in every nervous glance, one truth repeated itself. They had chosen the wrong side of the table. Ariana lifted her napkin, dabbed the corner of her mouth with flawless composure, and set it down again. She wasn't here to shout. She wasn't here to threaten. Her existence, her silence, was threat enough. And as the hall spiraled into panic, one sentence formed on every trembling pair of lips. She's not just powerful. She's untouchable. The power broker rose from his chair like a man stepping into his own execution. His daughter clung to his sleeve, whispering frantic pleas, but he shook her off with a stiff, trembling hand. His eyes bloodshot, desperate, locked onto the woman at the far end of the table. The woman he had mocked without looking twice. The woman whose silence had unraveled his empire in under 20 minutes. He cleared his throat, but the sound broke halfway out, thin as cracked porcelain. Miss Steele. He forced the words through a tight jaw. This situation has escalated beyond reason. If you reverse even a portion of these withdrawals, we can stabilize the markets before morning. Ariana didn't look at him immediately. She smoothed a crease on the linen napkin beside her plate, the gesture elegant, unhurried, the ritual of someone who owned her own time. Only then did she lift her gaze. Before tonight, she said quietly, I funded 6 of your cornerstone projects. I underwrote your public initiatives. I backed your negotiations abroad. Her voice carried across the table like a verdict. You succeeded because I allowed you to. Gasps fluttered around the hall like startled birds. The power broker flinched, his jaw twitching. That's not, you don't understand the political weight I carry. These decisions don't just affect me. They were never just about you, Ariana replied. The minister beside him tried to intervene, lifting a placating hand. Miss Steele, perhaps we can discuss this privately. No, Ariana said. Disrespect happened in public. Correction will too. The blonde daughter stiffened as if slapped. The quartet, sensing the shift, lowered their bows entirely. Ariana continued, voice calm, unwavering. I sat at this table because I was invited as a strategic partner someone expected to uphold your agenda, fund your growth, and remain silent while you decided who deserved dignity. Her eyes hardened. And you believed silence meant submission. The power broker swallowed. His authority, once a towering presence, now looked like a costume slipping off its frame. You're destroying years of collaboration over a moment of poor judgment, he said. No, Ariana replied softly. I'm ending years of enabling arrogance. I have to process. A ripple of shock moved across the guests. She pushed her chair back slightly, not standing yet, just shifting the balance of the room toward herself. The chandeliers caught the glint in her eyes, turning her expression into something almost regal. You called me someone who shouldn't be at this table, she said. But your table is held up by the investments I built. The policy you brag about is funded by the communities you ignore, and the projects you parade as your legacy, she paused, will not survive without the competence you have never shown. The power broker's shoulders sagged. Behind him, his daughter whispered, She's destroying us. Ariana lifted her chin. I'm not destroying anything, she said. I'm simply returning the consequences to their rightful owners. A stunned silence fell. Not fearful, reverent. Because for the first time, the room fully understood who she was. Not a guest. Not a token. Not a seat filler. but the architect of their fortunes and the author of their downfall. And when Ariana finally rose from her chair, the hall moved with her, as if gravity itself had chosen its side. When Ariana stood, the room moved with her. Not physically, not visibly, but in the way gravity shifts before a storm breaks. The chandelier above her flickered, catching fire against the facets as if recognizing the true center of the hall at last. For the first time all evening, she addressed the entire room. Not with volume, with precision. "You built your fortunes on my capital," she said. "Tonight I reclaim what was never yours to misuse." She reached for her clutch, removed a slim black folder, understated, immaculate, and placed it onto the table. No one dared breathe as she unfolded it. Inside were documents that did not need signatures. They had already been executed the moment she touched her phone. "Effective immediately," Ariana said. "The 10 to 12 billion withdrawn from your projects has been reassigned." A murmur rippled down the table, fear, disbelief, something close to awe. "To where?" someone whispered. Ariana didn't turn toward the voice. She looked straight ahead, announcing it not as a threat, but as a fact so complete it carried its own weight. "Education, infrastructure, innovation," she said. "But this time, the communities who build nations will be the ones who benefit, not the individuals who exploit them." A senator blanched. "You can't reroute that kind of capital without—" "I already have." The bluntness struck the hall harder than any shout could. A few guests sat back as if hit by an invisible force. Ariana continued. "Scholarship endowments have been tripled. STEM initiatives in underfunded districts now have 10-year guarantees. Micro-lending programs across marginalized communities will be funded in full. And every cent that once upheld your vanity projects," her gaze cut toward the power broker, "now supports futures you never bothered to notice." The blonde daughter looked horrified. "You're giving it away? To strangers?" Ariana's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained even. "They were never strangers. They were simply invisible to people like you." A diplomat near the center table exhaled sharply, realization dawning. "This wasn't retaliation," he murmured. "It was redirection." Ariana inclined her head the slightest bit, the first acknowledgement she had given the room all night. "Accountability," she said softly, "is not punishment. It is correction." The power broker looked as though the floor itself had tilted beneath him. "All of those projects, everything we plan, they'll collapse." Ariana met his gaze without pity. "Then they were never built to last. You constructed monuments to yourself, not structures for the world." He opened his mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because even he understood it now, the fragility, the vanity, the hollowness of everything he'd built atop her stability. Ariana closed the folder. The sound was soft. Final, like the closing of a vault door. "The world will not suffer from this," she said. "Only those who believed entitlement was a substitute for ethics." Silence blanketed the hall. Not fear, not humiliation, but something deeper, the dawning truth that the redistribution she had enacted was not a strike, but a recalibration of an entire system. Ariana adjusted the strap of her gown, the motion smooth, regal, and the message was unmistakable. She had not come to destroy their world. She mourning, the power broker's empire was a hollow shell. Projects stalled, alliances dissolved, influence evaporated. Headlines framed him not as a statesman, but as the man undone by his own arrogance. Ariana exited the banquet hall without haste, her footsteps quiet against the marble, the weight of the evening resting behind her, not on her. She didn't look back. Power didn't require an audience, and dignity had never needed their permission. Had come to build a better one, with or without them.